What's going on YouTube? So we are doing this. We are going to be modding this Squier Affinity Starcaster Deluxe. So let's go ahead and get it disassembled. After you have the guitar disassembled, go ahead and inspect the body. When this one came from the factory from Squier, the bridge pins weren't necessarily pushed down all the way. So we're going to try to attempt to get those to sit a little bit flatter. And then the neck pocket was looking a little crazy. I'm assuming that's where they hung the guitar for paint. Now start off by filling in any extra holes that you don't need. Basically for the neck pickup cavity, I'm using some toothpicks and some wood glue to just glue in the areas where they were drilled for the neck pickup. So a little bit of wood glue and some toothpicks goes a long way. Now as for the actual neck pocket itself, I'm just going to use a little bit of this wood filler to kind of spread it out and fill in those extra holes that they used to hang the guitar with when they painted it. Now moving on to the neck pickup cavity, we are going to be using some JB Weld quick wood. This is a 2-part wood epoxy. Essentially all you do is cut off a piece, mold it in your hand, and then press it into place. It will take a little bit to cure properly, but just go ahead and try to fill into the neck pickup cavity as much as possible. Also at the same time too, I'm going to be using this to also fill in the holes where the original volume and tone pot, as well as the 3-way switch, were pre-drilled from the factory. Now as for the actual neck pickup cavity, I am trying to fill in the hole where they routed for the wires to come through for the neck pickup. This is going to be the most essential part because we will be filling the neck pickup cavity with some epoxy. Obviously, we don't want any of the 2-part liquid epoxy to kind of flow into the rest of the body cavity. So like I mentioned, just take a piece of the JB Weld quick wood, cut a piece off, mold it in your hand, and then go ahead and press it into place. This is essentially going to create a barrier between the actual neck pickup cavity and the rest of the semi-hollow body. Once you have the neck pickup cavity filled, and you are happy with it, you can then go ahead and let this cure. This took a few days to fully cure. I actually let it sit probably somewhere around a week before I decided to remove the bridge post pins. Basically all I did was I used a block of wood and some pliers to kind of just pry it out. Also at the same time too, we have to take care of some extra little holes. I didn't do this initially because I didn't notice them. But essentially from the factory, there were extra pre-drilled holes in the bridge pickup cavity. So I'm just using some more toothpicks and some more wood glue to fill those holes in before I sand this flat. At this point, I'm just using a 240 grit sandpaper to level out the 2-part wood epoxy that we use to fill in the holes. This is just strictly to level out the 2-part wood epoxy we used to fill in the volume, tone, and 3-way switch holes on the body. Once you have everything leveled out, you can then go ahead and move on to your next step. I'm going to skip sanding over the sides as of right now. We will do that at a later point in time. Now at this point, you can go ahead and grab some sort of a silicone. I grabbed this flex shot stuff that we had in the garage. And basically you're just going to make a bead around the neck pickup cavity because you don't want any of your 2-part liquid epoxy to flow out through this. You basically want to create a barrier when you go to fill in the neck pickup cavity with the epoxy. Now I will have to take care of this little guy right here, but essentially when I was sanding the guitar, we broke through some of that wood epoxy and it kind of looks a little gnarly, so we're going to have to take care of that a little bit further on down the road. At this point, what I would recommend, if you did use some wood grain filler on the actual neck pocket, to go ahead and sand that flat. I originally attempted this with a neck plate and some sticky sandpaper, but the chrome on the neck plate made it a little bit harder to kind of push and pull that. So essentially I switched to using a block with some 120 grit sandpaper just to make it a lot easier to push and pull to flatten out that neck pocket. Once you have that done, you can then go ahead and mix up your epoxy. I used 1.5 ounces of the resin and 1.5 ounces of the hardener. What I would highly recommend is doing smaller amounts. I believe when I did my Epiphone Dot Studio, I did the same thing, but I actually ended up putting like a block of wood in the neck pickup cavity, which I ended up using a smaller amount of the epoxy, so it didn't take as long to cure. When I did this, I poured the epoxy all at once, and it actually took a lot longer for that epoxy to cure properly. Anyways, go ahead and mix it up, pour it into the neck pickup cavity, Like I mentioned, I would just do smaller pours at first, you know, mix up probably a ½ ounce or less of the epoxy, and then you can go ahead and pour that, let it cure for a while, and then mix up another small amount. I was just trying to get it all done at once, but highly recommend doing smaller amounts of the epoxy. After you've poured the epoxy, you can then go ahead and let that cure. This is a little time-lapse video of about an hour's worth. I was expecting the epoxy to sink down into the neck pocket further, but it actually didn't. And then after a couple of weeks, I waited. I went ahead and sanded the epoxy flat. Now, the epoxy was raised above the neck pickup cavity, so I ended up going and sanding this all down. It actually took a while because I originally started with like a 120 or 240 grit sandpaper. I can't exactly remember which grit I started with, but I can tell you I did end up switching to a coarser grit to cut through the epoxy a lot faster, so take that into account. At this point, you're basically just trying to knock down that epoxy. If you can get it to sit flat and where it doesn't kind of like bulge over the neck pickup cavity, then you might not have to do this as much. You might just have to try to flatten it out. Once I got that sanded down flat, I used some automotive Bondo to go over the area where the epoxy was poured just to make sure that there was no extra like little cavities or divots. Let that cure, and then you can go ahead and sand that flat as well. Once you have sanded everything and you are happy with it, you can then move on to this next step if you choose. I'm going to use a 2K clear coat to go over the area that we had poured the epoxy in. This is just going to give me another little extra barrier, so this way when I do go to paint it, I have a nice smooth and flat surface. Also at the same time too, I am also spraying the 2K clear coat into the neck pocket. This is just going to help ensure that in the long run, I don't have any issues with the work that we did in the actual neck pocket. I would also like to recommend that if you are going to do this or even painting the guitar, throw some paper towels into the F-holes just so this way you're not getting overspray and stuff in there. After you have applied your coats of 2K clear coat, if you choose to go with this step, you can then go ahead and let this cure for a couple weeks. After a couple of weeks, you can then go ahead and start to sand this flat. Now, for the most part, I am most likely using either 600 grit or 800 grit. I don't exactly remember, but it should be somewhere around there because essentially what we're doing now is we're just trying to make any of these scratches originally from the 240 grit that we used to sand the body. We're trying to make those scratches smaller. So probably 600 or 800 grit at this point. The 2K clear coat got a little out of hand and we got some runs down the side, but we're going to go ahead and take care of those anyways. You can then go ahead and start to sand the sides. Now again, we left the sides unsanded at first, but at this point, right before we get ready to go for paint, we're going to go ahead and scuff everything up. When you scuff this stuff up, 600 grit or 800 grit should work. I went with 800 grit because I wanted some finer scratches on the body, so this way when I apply my 2K matte clear coat, you don't see any of those scratches come through the clear. Once you have everything sanded, you can then go ahead and move on to drilling the hole for the new volume pot. Now I'm looking at a Tom DeLonge Starcaster on Fender's website, just trying to get an idea of where that hole should be. Go ahead and mark the hole where you think it should line up, and then just go ahead and grab the smallest drill bit you can find and step it up from there. So essentially all you're doing is finding one small drill bit, finding the next size, and you're just going to keep doing this until you get the hole big enough to where you can use some sort of a either step bit or move up from a 1/4 inch to a 3/8. Now I had this Warrior step drill bit that I got from Harbor Freight. I think this was like $5. I went from a 1/4 inch all the way up to 3/8 inch, and then I found a drill bit that was the 3/8 inch size and just reamed it out the best that I could. At this point, I'm going to use a little sandpaper just to kind of knock down any of the hard edges or any of the chips that may have been produced with the drilling through the paint and the body. And then I'm going to take that sandpaper, roll it into a little joint, and just kind of sand the inside of that hole just to get everything all nice and flat. Then you can go ahead and move on to taping. So for taping the neck pocket, I do 2 pieces on the actual like flat surface of the neck pocket. And then I do 1 big piece around the edge of the neck pocket itself. This is just going to make it easier after I paint the body to remove the tape. Now, a little trick that I like to do is I like to take a little sandpaper and just go along the edge of the actual tape after I've cut it off. This kind of gives me a little like perforated edge, kind of almost. And then what I will do is I'll take my thumbnail and I'll just kind of go along the edge of the tape, trying to just slightly peel it off from the actual body itself. I'm not trying to like peel it off. I'm just trying to create like a little like gap. So this way, when I go to paint, I'm not pulling the paint and clear coat off at the same time as the tape. I'm then going to take a microfiber cloth and some rubbing alcohol and just wipe the body down, getting any sort of grease, dirt, or debris off before I go to tape the actual body. Now, I don't know if there is a better way to do this. Essentially, all I did was I took some tape and just kind of went along the edge of the actual guitar body itself. Essentially, what I was trying to do is create sort of like a recessed body. So this way, when I spray the paint, I'm not getting overspray on the rest of the guitar or the sides of the guitar. I don't think I pushed the tape down hard enough to the body because I did end up having a little bit of overspray at the end, which I used some rubbing alcohol and a microfiber cloth to just kind of scrub off. Again, like I mentioned, go ahead and just use some paper towels and stuff those into the F-holes if you don't want to get overspray or paint inside of the cavity of the guitar. Now, I went to Custom Paints and had them scan this color, so they made me up a very, very good color match. Just do light coats at first. So a very nice light tack coat. Let that cure for probably 10 minutes and then come back in and start applying a much more generous and heavy coat. So after 10 minutes, I'm just applying my secondary coat. Once you achieve full coverage, you can then go ahead and wait probably, I would say, a minimum of 20 to 30 minutes and then pull the tape off the sides. Now, initially, when I did pull the tape off, I didn't have any sort of issues besides the lower horn around the bottom of the guitar. Ended up pulling some of the paint off with it. Obviously, like I mentioned, I did get a little bit of overspray, so I basically just took a microfiber cloth and some rubbing alcohol and just lightly kind of went over that. It took a little longer than expected, but I eventually did end up getting that paint off. And here is the chipped area that I was talking about. I did end up just letting that go because it was in such a small, inconspicuous area that you weren't really going to notice it too much. At this point, you can go ahead and activate your 2K matte clear, or if you're using a gloss clear. In this instance, I'm using Spray Max 2K matte clear. So there's a little red plastic stopper that you basically take off the cap, push that into the bottom. You can do this on the ground. It makes it a lot easier, but I was just trying to show you how to activate it by hand. Obviously, I'm struggling because it's not very easy to push that thing in by hand. Eventually, you will get it though. Shake up the aerosol can for a good minimum of 2 minutes, and then go ahead and start applying your clear coat. The matte clear coat, when you spray it, is kind of hard to see, so I would recommend kind of trying to spray at an angle, if that makes sense. At least this way you can see where you're getting a nice wet coat. With the matte clear coat, it's, like I mentioned, a little hard to see straight on, so just kind of try to do it from an edge where you can see it. When you apply the matte clear, obviously you want to have it look like it's wet, but you don't want it to drip. So don't apply too much. You just want a nice coat on there. Obviously, you don't want to get any sort of runs or anything at this point, because with matte clear coat, if you do have any runs or any issues, you basically have to wait for that to cure. Then you have to sand it flat and reapply. So go ahead and apply your matte clear. Now, if you do have any sort of an issue, like I paint outside, unfortunately, I don't have an indoor spray area, so I got a little bit of dirt in this. I am going to show you guys my little trick. Take some tape, and basically all you're doing is you're just kind of pressing it into the body. Once you pull the piece out, you can then go ahead and apply clear coat back over that. As long as it's still wet, you can do this. If the clear coat had cured for a little while, it may pull some of that clear coat and paint off with it. But if the coat is still somewhat wet, you can go ahead and use this tape trick and then just apply another kind of like quick coat back over it. It should help level everything back out. Once you've applied your last coat, go ahead and let that cure. And then we're going to move on to the neck. Now go ahead and take the old tuners off. If you are changing out the tuners, I'm using a 10 millimeter. I don't think that's the correct size, but it worked for me. And we got to fill in these original holes that came from the factory for the tuners. So I found these Q-tips with like a wooden dowel attached to them. So these actually fit perfectly into these tuner drill holes. So basically all I'm doing is just making a little bunch of dowels, cutting them short, and then I'm going to glue them into place and sand that flat. Once you have those glued into place, give it about an hour or so for the glue to dry, and then you can go ahead and knock it down and sand it flat. Once you have it sanded flat, you can then go ahead and install your new tuners. Now, for this StewMac tuner drill jig, it's fairly easy to use, and I'm going to give you guys a little quick piece of advice for this. If you plan on doing more than one guitar, I highly recommend picking one of these up. They're about $90. You can get them from StewMac, but they are invaluable, especially if you want to install locking tuners on all of your guitars. I think that it is highly worth it. Here is my recommendation. When you are installing tuners with this, what I would highly recommend is to get a ruler and use the ruler just to make sure that one end of the drill jig and the other end of the drill jig are at the same measurement. So if one edge is at 1 millimeter and the other edge is at 1.5 millimeters, obviously it's not level. So you want to make sure that that is level. So when you go to check the levelness of the drill jig, if both of those areas are the same, so if it's 1.25 at one edge and it's 1.25 at the other edge, then you know that it's going to be level, and the tuners will be level across the entire headstock. That's the easiest way that I found to use this. I think in the instructions they tell you to install the tuner jig into one end of the headstock, like at the lower E string, and then basically just kind of float another tuner at the high E string, and then use a level or use a ruler to kind of make sure that, you know, it's level like that. I think just using a ruler and making sure that the drill jig is level at both sides. So if it's one millimeter at one edge, it has to be 1 millimeter at the other edge. Hopefully that makes sense. You can then go ahead and drill your pilot holes for each one of the tuners. I didn't go down far enough for all of these. Essentially, once I had everything drilled, I just went back through and just kind of used the drill to kind of make the holes a little bit deeper, so this way the tuners would fit into the actual headstock. All right, and basically at this point we can go ahead and assemble the guitar. Now I'm going to use a little copper foil tape and just kind of slap that into the bridge pickup cavity. I'm not the best at doing this. I have seen some other people that are really good at doing it, but I just make sure the bridge pickup cavity is pretty full of copper foil tape, so this way I don't have any extra hums when I install the pickup. Go ahead and reinstall the ground wire for the bridge pin post. Now to reinstall the actual bridge posts, I'm just using a small rubber mallet to kind of tap those in. What I would recommend is getting like a piece of wood or like a dowel stick that's the same size as these and using those as sort of a driver. I got them down pretty far. I don't think I got them down far enough, but they are at least level compared to what came from the factory from Squier. Once you have those installed, you can then go ahead and do test fitment and install your bridge pickup. Now we are obviously using the Seymour Duncan SH5 for this build specifically, obviously because it's a Tom DeLonge guitar. Install that, run the wire through the cavity, and just go ahead and assemble the guitar at this point. Go ahead and install the neck, and then go ahead and solder up your volume pot. Now I am installing a treble bleed on this. They're fairly easy to install. Go ahead and pre-solder your volume pot, pre-tin it, and do all that stuff. It makes it a lot easier in the long run. Now to install the treble bleed circuit, all you're doing is you're soldering it into the left and center lug. So the two lugs that are furthest to the left. Obviously, the one furthest to the right is grounded to the back of the body, so we're not going to be doing anything with that. It's a little tricky to get the treble bleed in if you do pre-solder these, but it is doable. You can then go ahead and solder up your pickup. So The green and the bare wire go to the back of the actual volume pot. The red and the white wire get twisted together, and then the black wire goes to that very far left lug all the way towards the end. You can then go ahead and run some fresh wire to the input jack. I like this wax potted wire. It makes it much easier to pull through the guitar body and stuff like that. So take that into consideration. You can get that stuff on Amazon, like a package of it for about $10. It just makes it easier to pull through the cavities, especially because it's like kind of stiff, but also flexible. Go ahead and run that, solder that up to your volume pot, and put everything back together. It was a little tricky for me to get the actual volume pot through the body, and I ended up having to go back with some small files and file that hole out just slightly to allow the volume pot to actually fit into the hole. We did eventually get it. Go ahead and slap the rest of everything on this baby together. I'm using some lemon oil from StewMac. Just gonna go ahead and slather up this neck and string her up, and pretty much that's it. Once you have it stringed up, you can then go ahead and make sure it's in tune and give it a little test play. So let's go ahead and hear what this thing sounds like. All right, and that's the video. So tell me what you guys think in the comments. Do you think that this was a worthy build? So in all, when I purchased this guitar originally, it was $350. So I think I ended up paying $370 through Fender. They are now $420 on their website thanks to the tariffs. If you're looking to do this build, you're looking at $420 for the guitar. Then you're also looking at $100 for the pickup. Looking probably around another $100 for the actual tuners, and then doing the work yourself. So if you plan on repainting this a different color, you know, depending on how much paint you're actually going to need. So in all, I want to say that this build probably cost me around $600 to build a Squier Tom DeLonge Starcaster. Doing all that work, it did take me a little bit to get this finished, but in the end, I think it was pretty much worth it. I am still waiting on a custom neck plate from France to get here, but eventually I will have a Tom DeLonge neck plate for this. If you guys like this video, go ahead, give it a thumbs up, give it a like. If you didn't like this video, also give it a thumbs up. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit all the buttons. I'm Jordan, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.